the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue. Two men, 53-year-old Adrian Dolby and 66-year-old Melvin Kravitz, were both killed when a man drove into pedestrians and attacked people with a knife. The suspect, identified as 35-year-old Jihad al-Shami, is a British citizen of Syrian descent who was shot dead by police at the scene. 3 others have been hospitalized with serious injuries, and authorities have arrested 3 additional people in connection with this incident, which has been declared a terrorist attack. Public outrage and grief have followed this attack, with flowers and notes left near the synagogue. Neighbors of the suspect described living in the area as frightening, while the UK's chief rabbi has condemned the attack as the result of an unrelenting wave of Jew hatred. Let's listen into what a local resident has said.
And then after they loaded up in the cars and drove off, and the minibus drove off, and the police van came in, literally came to the Crescent, they opened the side of the police van, and there must have been about 15 police officers that got out the van and went straight into number 1 Langley Crescent. And I'm thinking, this is not normal. Quite scary, to be truthful. Quite scary indeed, knowing that a terrorist is living under my nose. You know, from here to that address, what is it, 2-minute walk, if that. And to have somebody like that living on my estate is scary, very scary.
Has there been any, I mean, I know there's no real indication of this kind of thing usually, but have you ever had any indication of any trouble in that Crescent?
No.
Memorials were held today to honor the victims as worshippers and local residents paid their respects. The city of Manchester continues to come to terms with the shock of this tragic event, while authorities investigate the circumstances surrounding the attack. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, what more can you tell us about this shocking, tragic incident?
Assume good to be with you again. As you have just commented on, so this terrorist act, this terrorist drove a car into members of that congregation outside. As you've just reported on, sadly the security then got out, the security guard was stabbed to death. Other members there were stabbed, someone else has died. So 2 people have died and 3 other people are fighting for their lives in hospital. And then of course the assailant and the terrorist, because we will call it a terrorist act because it is, was then, in my opinion, was then taken out. This is horrendous. This is awful, and especially this was conducted on the day of Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement, the holiest day within the Jewish calendar, and that has to be noted because that is why on this terrorist then, in my opinion, then decided to act on this particular day, and the congregation were inside the synagogue at the time. This kind of effect, of course, as you've just said, that report within the area and how this affects people on the ground is devastating, as has just been said by in that report. But we have to put this against the backdrop that we have seen marches since the 7th of October, within days, hours, minutes. There have been protests for pro-Palestine protests in London virtually every weekend and every other weekend, and I was to say they even were carried out yesterday. There was one down Whitehall near Downing Street, and Downing Street there, one in Manchester and elsewhere, which I think is in a little bit of poor taste, to say the least. But this is the backdrop of creating this environment, and there has not been enough pushback against this by the government, in my opinion. And also, if we look at the way within the media, the way this is with various reports, things said within the public discourse have not helped and have fed into this. Assume.
Yes. And Mark, like you've said, now after this incident, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has increased police presence or security at synagogues nationwide. Do you think that this is a little late since this incident has already occurred, and maybe elsewhere it can occur too in the UK?
I don't want to see this escalate at all, but my fear is that it may do. But it's the discourse, it's the comments that have been said. Remember, the UK have decided to recognise a Palestinian state, to recognise a state that doesn't exist. And then what happens is, if politically it doesn't go that way to that ideology and thought, and then they all have an appalling temper tantrum and start rioting in Milan and Spain and other cities, which we witnessed last night. We witnessed a few days ago, as I've said previously. Giorgia Meloni says, I'm not recognizing a Palestinian state, so people think it's perfectly acceptable to go and riot in Milan. No, this is bullying. This is absolute bullying. And people need to understand the historical facts of why we are at this point. And if not that they will listen, but the Palestinians then, within that construct that was created by Yasser Arafat in 1964, Palestinianism, have turned around and have refused a separate state 4 times to live, as they would call it, live by the state of Israel, which is the only democratic country in that region within the Middle East. There are many other Arab states, and you could quite, as I have said, historically, Jordan, when it was founded, is the Palestinian state from Transjordan to Jordan. There you go. There is a homeland. You've started a 2-state solution in Gaza, and that has not been acceptable either. All of this discourse has to be put in on the table, because it has contributed to this. We've seen appalling acts in Colorado. We've seen appalling acts in Washington when those 2 young Israelis were then killed, and also Jewish people were killed, and also the acts within Colorado of someone thinking it's perfectly acceptable to throw Molotov cocktails at Jewish people there. The list, sadly, is endless. But as people have said and have been commentating on the last 24 hours, that if the government in the UK had stamped on this and with these marches early, then this was also, people feel this was brought the temperature down. And as I have previously said, if the UK Prime Minister, on the one hand, is saying we recognise Palestine, and then wishing the Jewish people in the UK happy Rosh Hashanah, he really needs to think about what he's saying in this instant. Asuma.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next